Hello plant people, how are you guys doing today? I want to welcome you to the Indoor Grow series where we are learning how to garden indoors. So if you missed the first episode, you definitely should check that out. We went to PV Mart and we checked out everything they have available and what your different options are. But I promised you a video on what exactly I chose to bring home and why. So here I have the root farm system down below, and then I have the Jiffy pod growing system just above. Now there were some other options there, such as the starter kit, that sort of thing, but I'm going to show you how to start seeds outside of these systems here in the next episode. And the seeds I'll be starting is herbs and leafy greens. Now, with that being said, you can use the larger version down here, which is the root farm system, to grow an entire tomato plant, an entire pepper plant, you name it. Now, this one up here is going to be reserved more so for leafy greens or herbs. The reason for that is because the water reservoir isn't big enough to sustain a larger size plant. While you may think you can stay on top of it water-wise and topping it up on a twice a week, that sort of thing, which I'm confident you can do, the issue is the actual container may not be big enough to hold that plant in place. Whereas this container down here not only has a larger reservoir, but is a much heavier pot, and therefore it's not going to tip over. So in this series, we're going to start here with the actual container setups and going through what's in the system and why it matters. Then we'll be talking about lighting, the actual seed starting portion of it, which will be the next episode. And then we're going to look at fertilizers and all the complicated chemicals that come with it that really are not that complicated, because we're going to break those down into bite-sized pieces. Let's jump into what's inside these boxes and what makes them a little bit different from each other. So because the Hydro system is the top box, we'll start with the Jiffy Hydro. Now, this technically doesn't have to just be used for herbs and leafy greens. You could also use this for indoor plant propagation. And let me tell you, if you use a hydro system to propagate your cuttings, you're going to see much faster results than either a LECA propagation or even a water propagation system. So if you really want to increase just even the survival rate of your propagations, or you want them to root quicker, this is definitely a great option. So this is what comes in our Jiffy Hydro system. Let's go through what each one of these are and kind of what makes this one more valuable when compared to the one below. So the first thing we have is our pots. Now this is just a universal size pot. If this broke or busted, you can very easily replace this with just anything generic around the same size. It's literally quite a thin plastic. So this is going to be your vessel that's going to hold your material. You can see it has some holes on the bottom, but other than that, there's no holes on the side. There's nothing special about this. Next up, we have the growing medium. Now this is pumice, is what is in here. And if we look at the pumice in particular, you're going to notice it's very, very porous. It has a ton of little holes. And inside of those holes, we have the ability to supply oxygen or air. And oxygen is very important when it comes to photosynthesis. So when we have a really porous medium, such as the pumice, we ultimately have a balance between nutrients, growing medium, water, and air, which is perfect for what we need. Now, the downfall of using a pumice-based system such as this is that if we're growing from seed and not from a cutting, what ends up happening is we ultimately will lose our seed, and our seed may have a really hard time germinating, and therefore it may rot. And so we need to start our seeds or our seedlings separate and outside of the actual pumice here. But we'll be going over seed starting in the next video. Just something to keep in mind though is if you want to start directly in the hydro system, this is not the one you want to go with. You do want to go with a different system. Now, if you're doing cuttings or you already have a plant that you just want to transplant into a hydro system, then this is a good system to go with. You are going to want to wash this out prior to. It is a physical inorganic rock, and just the shipping and handling and just being in a bag, it's very, very dusty stuff. The other benefit to the pumice is that because it has so many air spaces, it has so much surface area in general, there's a lot of microbial activity that can take place, and that means things like your nitrogen cycle or your phosphorus cycle can take place inside of this medium, and ultimately when you fertilize, you're going to have a faster transition when it comes to bioavailable nutrient for the plant. So this here is your pot, your water reservoir, and obviously there are no holes on the bottom because we need to fill this with water. Now they recommend that you keep it filled up into at least the third line from the bottom. So if we look inside the pot, we can see 1, 2, 3. They recommend 2 at least here. Now if you wanted to, you could fill it even higher. It's not going to harm anything. You just obviously don't want it overflowing out the sides because that's less than ideal. So this top portion obviously is now your new soil surface, and it is going to serve quite a few functions. Obviously the black pot will fit inside of this circle. This little area here is where the air pump goes into, which we'll talk about here very, very soon. And then the actual top in general is meant to help reduce the rates of evaporation, or in the plant world, we like to call it evapotranspiration, which is essentially the loss of water from the system as a whole. So we can put the pot in after we filled it up with the pumice and place it inside of the container. When you go to transplant your seedling into the actual container, you want to fill this black pot here up 3/4 of the way with the pumice, place your plant in, and then complete the process of filling it flush to the top. The reason for this is because you do want the plant to be submerged to a point that the roots are able to get the moisture it needs and the nutrient it needs without planting it too low and harming the plant. The same thing is going to go with cuttings. You're obviously going to plant your cutting so that it is within the water and will be able to see the water level when you do get this filled up. So next up is the aerator, and what this is going to do is it's going to add oxygen to the system. This doesn't have to be ran the entire time with an aeration system. You can only run it for 6 to 8 hours if you would like. It's completely up to you, but you can run it nonstop if you want as well. It's just obviously going to use power. So what we're doing here is we're circulating and adding air to the system. This is going to add oxygen, which ultimately is again used in photosynthesis, and it's going to help keep that pumice well aerated, the soil well aerated, and it's going to prevent against something we call an anaerobic environment. Anaerobic environments is what causes those nasty things we like to call root rot and just general deterioration of the roots themselves. So to prevent against that, we use aeration. So this hose here is not going to suck up any water whatsoever. It is simply just going to go into the hole, and you do need to make sure it is in the actual water itself. So you need to adjust the height of this based on where you think your minimum water level is going to go to. Keep in mind, you're going to have to refill this, and they do recommend that you actually replace the water in here once every 14 days. So you have to kind of gauge how much babysitting you're willing to do with this system and then adjust this accordingly. You want to have it at a depth that's going to ensure the air that's being bubbled is being bubbled into the water itself. And it's not going to wreck the pump if it's just bubbling into thin air. I mean, it's not going to harm it because it's not a submersible pump. However, it's just not going to help your plants. So inside of here, we have our pump. It's very, very basic. If you've had a fish tank, you know what this is. So this is the exact same thing as a literal fish tank pump. And so on here, we put our end here, and we will place this on the counter and plug it in. The important thing to remember with the exterior pumps is that they are A, not waterproof, and B, they can backflush water into them, which will wreck them. So one thing that this does not come with is a back check divider, and something that I do recommend getting because it's going to save the pump in the event that the water backflushes into here which can happen. So there's one way to prevent this if you don't have the back flush valve, and it's literally a check valve that only allows the air to go out and water not to come back in. If you can, in an ideal scenario, you would place this higher up rather than down beside it. Now I know the box shows it as being beside the container, but if you can put it up higher than the water level, even if it does try to back flush into the hose, it's not going to be able to go against gravity, right? It can only get a little bit of extra action through capillary action, but other than that, it's not going to end up in the pump. So if you can, a little stool or something to set it up, or go to a pet store that will have the back check valve, and all you got to do is simply just a tiny little cut anywhere in the line and pop the back check in and stick the hose on the sides. So I'll try to insert a photo of what those back check valves look like so you can add it to the system if in the event your only option is to put it down beside the container here. So that is it for the Jiffy Hydro system. Like I said, it's a relatively tiny container, and I think that Jiffy knows that because they do have a little dial on the box, and the dial does say it's not meant for fully mature plants. It's meant for between young and mature plants. So I take that as like a lettuce or a herb type plant, only because the water reservoir isn't necessarily large enough and they are just using an aeration pump in this case. So something to keep in mind, if you're looking for herbs and veggies, this is the direction to go in. So this one here obviously is quite a bit bigger, and this is the root farm option. Now, I really just like this company in general, and PV Mart carries literally everything you need to indoor grow with the root farm system. And they make it very, very simple for both advanced and beginners. And like I said, you can grow an entire cannabis, tomato, pepper, cucumber plant in here, or you can have 4 smaller plants or 3 medium plants. It's really ultimately up to you. And this one is quite a bit different than that of the Jiffy Hydro. So if I was personally looking to grow a substantial amount of food and I didn't want a ton of work involved, I would go with the root farm system. You do not have to replace the water in here. You only need to clean it after harvest. So after the flower or the plant has been spent, you would go in and do a thorough cleaning. But you can also start your plants inside of these containers. And that is due to these wonderful containers here, which are the containers that pop in the top, which I'll show you a little bit later on. But all you're going to use in this is just regular old potting soil. I'll talk about these a little bit more in the next video when we talk about seed starting, but there literally is nothing fancy to this. You just simply put potting soil in here and you're good to go. The heavier the peat, the better in a lot of cases with this. Or if you are using cuttings or you're, transferring a plant over, you would just simply put it into this pot. And I know you're probably thinking like, that's really tiny for a tomato plant. And it is. And the tomato plant is going to bust out and wreck this. So you will need to repurchase these. And they're very, simple to find. They carry them nearly anywhere. You can buy them on Amazon. You can buy them from PV Mart. You can buy them from any home and garden center. And they're very, very inexpensive as well. So these will get wrecked every single time. I can almost guarantee it. You will never be able to clean the roots out of this because it'll be an absolute mess. If you wanted to go with soilless, you could technically use a foam or something of that nature in this as well. But like I said, you can start your seeds directly in the system and not worry about the seedling getting lost like you would in the pumice system. So I'm gonna flip this guy over on its side so we can get a better look at what's inside of here. So inside of this incredibly light container, that's also another huge bonus, you can move it very easily. It looks like it's very heavy, but it's not. Once it's full of water, it's going to be real heavy. But for right now, very easy to manage. So inside of here, you can see there's obviously the container, and we can see there's a pump at the bottom, and it's inside of this wonderful mechanism. So this is another difference between the Jiffy Hydro option and this option here, is that we don't need that back check valve. We have a submersible waterproof pump. All we need to make sure is that it is covered in water. If you let it run water free, you're going to burn out the pump. But so long as you have water on top, you will be just fine. And this one is doing the same thing. It's not necessarily adding oxygen, but it is agitating the water. And the purpose for the agitation is to kind of break up the surface of the water in hopes of adding oxygen and ultimately making it an aerobic environment rather than an anaerobic environment, which ultimately is going to help your plants. So the fill for this is you fill it as full as you possibly can, and you continue to top up. Initially, when the seeds are starting, which we'll go over a little bit later, we don't need to add fertilizer, but once we get leaves and roots and shoots forming, we will need to add fertilizer to this system. So, but like I said, future videos for that one. So this here is the secret sauce to the entire system itself. This is your entire mechanism you need to determine what the heck's going on with your plants. So you can see there's these crazy looking hoses on the side. One is black, one is white, and for good reason. So they both have a different purpose. The white one is actually used for the plants. So this is the end that is going to attach to the pump. There is a little kind of segment coming off the pump, and you're going to push this into place. That is going to drive the water up the pipe into this white tubing that's located all around, and on the tubing it connects to these little black sections here, and on the black sections there's a tiny little hole, and that tiny little hole is being pushed directly into where our baskets will sit. So it'll sit like this, and it's going to force the water directly onto this basket, which is ultimately going to aerate it. This is going to give it the water it needs, the nutrient it needs, and then ultimately the oxygen, the air that it needs to survive and thrive. So this is why we can use a potting soil with this, is because we have direct water movement and a constant influx of air, nutrients, water. So it's never going to go stale. This will never go anaerobic, because we have so much pressure and movement on the pot itself. That is why we have the white pipe. Now the black pipe, this is on here for good reason. If we lift off this here, all these panels do come off of our root farm system. We can see there is a valve right up here on the top, and the valve is how you redirect the water. So if we want the water to go through the white pipe, we have to close off the black pipe. We just simply do that by twisting. If we want to open up the black pipe, then we simply twist it so that the water is redirected this way instead of this way. Now you're probably wondering, well, why would you want the water to go through the black pipe? I thought you wanted to go through the white pipe so that it fertilizes the plants. And you do, until you want to replace the water and you aren't a bodybuilder and you can't lift what will probably be a solid 50 pounds of water and plant material, because that container is going to get very, very heavy very quickly. So when it comes to removing the water and cleaning the whole container out, it is a heck of a lot better to have this attachment and you just simply turn the valve and you can fill up a 5-gallon pail and run it back and forth as many times as you need without hurting yourself. So how cool is that? That's what this black pipe is there. So when it goes into the system, it's literally just going to be dangling there in the water, not serving any purpose until you need it. Very cool stuff. And the way that the water gets into the black pipe is, again, this has to be attached to the pump, and it's literally just going to suck it through the white tube and redirect it this way. Kind of cool. So we know about what the white pipe on this portion is. We know what the ball valve here is for, what this pipe is for, what this pipe is for. We know that these tops come off. We know what these areas are for and how we fill those, this one too, with a basket. The second thing to look at is the plugs. So this comes with more than enough of these actual plugs themselves. And all these are for is for reducing rates of evapotranspiration, that fancy word again. So we want to reduce the rate in which water is lost from the system. And this is very easily done with these caps. So if you're choosing to grow one large plant, you would simply put the large plant container in here. We would cap off 3 of the pods. We would leave this one alone here, but otherwise we would cap off the 3 pods and voila, we are done. Now, if we wanted to plant 4 plants, we wouldn't cap off any at all, because we need to then move this one. And we'll talk about what that is here in a little bit. If we want to grow 3 plants, so 3 medium-sized plants, we would cap off the center one and then we would leave this in here. If we want to grow 4 small plants, which would be something like a herb that we're continually harvesting, a medium plant would be referenced as something like a leafy green, for example, like lettuce. I mean, they're larger than herbs. You got to wait till they reach a certain level of maturity before you harvest them. That would be 3 mediums. You would have this in the middle. Now, if you have the 4 plant, or any plant for that matter, you do have to leave one of them technically uncapped, because this does have little holes in it. And say we're growing herbs in this one, we're going to cap off this center here, and we're going to put this fancy device in the center. So let's take a look at what this fancy device is. So inside of this, we have our wonderful water indicator. And right now it doesn't look like much, but when we fill this sucker up with water, it's going to tell us how much water is present. So we need to be able to see this white little bobber sticking up, because it is a floatable bobber. If this bobber disappears, that means our water level is way too low for our plant roots, and our plants are going to die. So we always want to see this white bobber sticking up, and that is why we always have this in the system. Now, you're not going to have high rates of evaporation with this, because it is relatively enclosed besides this tiny little hole here. So you're not going to lose a lot of water with it, but you do want to make sure it's full enough that this white thing is sticking out the top. So this is our water level indicator, and in this case, we're going to stick it here in the middle. I want to thank you guys so much for watching today's second episode on indoor gardening. You guys have to let me know down in the comments below what specifically you want to see when it comes to indoor gardening and why, and I will be sure to do a video on that. But nonetheless, be sure to tune in for the next episode, which is going to be actual seed starting, how we choose our seed and how we start it just in general with both of these systems. You have to let me know what you're going to choose to indoor garden this year and why. I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.